All right, thank you, everybody. Continuing on, sort of bridging from the background to the problem, looking at the scope of it, we're going to have two sessions this afternoon at strategies for how to solve the problem. But I sort of see that there's one player that's kind of in the middle of this all, partly at the creation side, partly at the making available side, trying to make things available, and that's sort of the webmaster and the web owner. So to the extent that you all have influence on, control of, or are involved with managing websites, I thought that a good sort of way to kind of bridge this thing and create a narrative arc of what we're trying to talk about here would be to look at this from the webmaster's perspective. I manage and my team helps create and cultivate and preserve and all that good stuff, the law library website here at Georgetown, and I've been involved in others and talked to a lot of people about, like, well, what are the challenges? What do you wish people knew? And also, what do you wish people did? So when we were going into this, I thought, well, let's start thinking about what it is that we want to tell people. What are some best practices? What are some good ideas about, like, what should people be doing? How can we be part of the solution here? We have a lot of capture, preservation, and other things that we'll hear in detail, but it's also what are the sort of more general kind of on-the-ground sorts of things. And a month ago or so, we started thinking about, well, what is it that we could start telling people? And somebody had sent me a tweet to a link, which was the Journalists Resource, a website through a group at Harvard, and they have actually a fantastic listing of best practices solutions. This is a lot of more on the author side of things, but it's like those are a lot of the things that I was going to tell people. So the author had sent a tweet to us and mentioned it in there, and I said, hey, can we republish this? He says, well, actually, you didn't have to ask permission. This is under a Creative Commons license. I was like, well, shoot, you're right. I should have known that. Then the beauty of Creative Commons, I said, well, we don't need to republish it. Why don't we craft that and adapt it for something for our purposes so it's not specifically looking at for journalists, is trying to adapt it a little bit for a law audience, both for law professors and courts and people who manage government kinds of information. So we did that, and then of course with Creative Commons, the thing you want to do is attribute it. The materials, the substantive part, or a big section of the white paper that we have in our packet there includes things that are heavily used from this and adapted from it, but as with any good Creative Commons work, we like to cite it, and we also like to point out that it's not just the work of one person, it's the work of several people, and it's also the work of all of us here in the room. So what we've tried to put together in that resource is a lot of best practices that people could look at of what should people be doing in creating this, writing things, selecting links, putting them into materials, and doing all that. But I'm not going to talk about those specifics because we redacted that and kind of tweaked that to what we thought was relevant to our audience, and you can go to the original and look at it there to make other suggestions. What I want to take a look at here are some short topics of things. Leave a couple of minutes for questions at the end, just sort of thinking about what are some of the problems that I've seen, kind of looking at the nature of the problem and also thinking about what it is that's causing these and how we as webmasters and those who influence people running servers that deliver information, hopefully always and forever, how can we fix things? So one thought I had is, well, we might have this thought if people come from the outside and they look at things, if you look at one specific thing, says, well, maybe content doesn't really disappear. Well, yes, we know that it does, and we've got lots of numbers around that, but I almost see this view as like link rot deniers, like, well, but it's okay, we're really good researchers. You say it disappeared, but I can find it. I can track this down, and, good content stewards don't let things die. The GPO, they're great at this. Like, they're trying their darndest, and they're going to make this happen. So, like, well, it's going to happen, right? Is this really a problem? Well, we know that it is, and that's why we're all here. But I think that, in the interest of sort of, critical inquiry, we should think about, like, what is the scope of the problem, and what are the kinds of things that may cause things to break that we can help fix before they're a problem, or so that when people get to them later, they aren't a problem. So here's a report, 2002, Paris Glendenning had an Office of Smart Growth in Maryland, and they published this fantastic report. It's Driving Urban Environments, Smart Growth, Parking Best Practices. It's a random report, and it's out there online, and if you were to look for it, you would have, at the time in 2002, found that it's available at this URL. But if you went there today, it's not there. So you think, well, I'm a smart researcher. This didn't disappear. I'm going to find it. So what would you do? First thing you might do, and this is one of the recommendations that's in the paper, there's, well, you start at the source. It's like, well, start peeling back layers of a web URL and say, I'm just going to go to the main domain. They just must have moved it around during a redesign. Well, the unfortunate thing there is that page doesn't exist anymore. That page, that entire department is 404 because it's not part of the governor of Maryland's office any longer. So you think, well, I wonder where this is instead. I think I'm going to try to decide where I can find this. Smart growth, Maryland, those are two great terms. I'm going to Bing to find this, or Google, but I went to Bing just to see. So I went to Bing and I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to go to the department. Oh, look at this, Department of Planning in Maryland. They've got a smart growth topics section. They've got a search engine there. I'm going to be able to find it. I have the title of a published report that I can find. That's great. Well, I go there, and what do I find? 43 web pages have driving urban environments as somewhere in the title based on their algorithm. None of those are what I want. Fair enough. And I thought, well, actually, I'm searching it wrong is actually the problem. If you look at the results, there's pages and there's publications. Publications have a different import than just pages, right? Well, you go to pages, and, well, there's 0. This is a problem. What the heck's going on? So I then say, well, I'm just going to go to Bing, and I'm going to find it. Well, and I did find it. What I found is that there is actually a Department of Transportation site that has hosted this. It happens to be in Wisconsin. So kind of weird, but like this may or may not argue against link rot or disappearance of a cited reference because I went and found it, right? So, well, I did and I didn't. I found exactly what it was and it was there. But thankfully with this example, the Maryland State Law Library had harvested it and put it into the Chesapeake Project's digital collection. So it's there, and then because it's there, we can then back out of that and say, well, actually now this is a link that we can recognize that disappeared. And the issue here, I think, is one of something of a political problem or an organizational problem where it was an office within the governor's cabinet that no longer exists. The office is gone. What typically happens, clean the website, delete everything, kick it out, you're starting fresh. Well, that's an issue. And that's probably likely to be an issue for both administrative changes, website changes. That's going to happen, right? Well, that's life, and we have to sort of figure out how to deal with that. And so you think there's probably potential problems with executive and legislative branches where you're changing governments and things like that. You've got different offices coming in, things like that. And if you look through the long list of link rot citations, of citations for things for which the links have rotted in the Chesapeake Project, you'll see that within Maryland there are, in fact, a number of both legislative and executive branch documents that were harvested that no longer exist. I was looking at this thing. It's a very long list, and I'm not picking on Maryland, but I thought this was a good lens to think about government documents you think would be reliable and you think that they would be easily found. The last one I thought, well, I'm a little biased. I'm a librarian. I'm like, the librarian, they must have done it. This is the Department of Legislative Services. This is their library. And I think I'm just going to start at the root of that, and I'm going to find it. Well, you go there, and all you know is that they're running IIS version 7. That's what's at the root of this thing. There's nothing that even redirects you into what kind of content there is available. It's like, okay, well, but the judicial branch has got to get this right every single time, wouldn't you think? Court opinions, materials, everything they publish has got to be right. Well, within Maryland, there's also a publication called Amicus Curiarum, which is a newsletter of the State Reporter's Office, and this seems kind of important. Summaries of recent appellate opinions. People want to do this. It's published. It's got, pagination, volume numbers, all that great stuff. Here's a problem. A number of the links are gone based on the findings of the Chesapeake Project looking at the link rot problem for this. So that's a problem. So this leads me then into a recommendation for us as webmasters and us as people influencing those who manage websites, which is when we're changing things, we need to redesign and redirect responsibly. I'm not picking on Maryland. I'm not picking on any area there. I'm just saying think about change and what it impacts and how you can influence that positively. So let's take a look at some of these links specifically for this stuff that was in the Maryland Court's website. So at the top there's 4 links that are gone, and then there's 4 links that are actually there. tiny bit of research, I found it. They actually did a pretty good job. If I knew what I was looking for, it's there. But if I looked based on the citation, it's not there. And then you have to have that extra step, that extra human time getting involved. The thing that you'll notice, though, is that all of the actual file names and all of the paths are still the same. So what could have happened, and what I think could still happen now to correct this, is that you could make it so that the server says, I know you were looking for it here. I'm just going to give it to you over there. I'm not even going to have to tell you, this stuff has moved. I'm just going to send you over there. If you work with like an Apache server or something like that, an htaccess file, you just have rules that say, you look for it here, I'm delivering it there, we're good. So we ran into this problem with the law library website when we moved. We changed from one server to another, actually changed our domain fairly significantly. We thought a lot of people might link to our materials. We have legal materials, so we have opinions from we have historic preservation decisions that are there, so legally important things, as well as a lot of research guides that a bunch of other law schools link to, and we think, you know what, why don't we make life simple for people? Why don't we try to fix this? So we have a super complicated htaccess file where what we did is we basically said, if you were looking for X, we're going to give you Y, and we did that on a line-by-line basis for some of these things. Tedious work, yes. Some of it you can program, but the nice thing is with that last rule there, this is the type of thing that could have been done in that Maryland courts example, or could be done in other areas where you're redesigning sites, which simply says the file names are the same. They're in a different directory. If you're looking for it, we're just going to give it to you in the other place, and then you add a couple of rules there that actually rewrite the URL. So it's a new URL, so there's a little bit of a mental connection you might have to make, but it delivers to you the materials that you expect to find when you link on something to try to get to it. The other thing that you can do in terms of redesigning responsibly is start thinking about what is it that people actually use on our website. So if you go to your log files and your analytics, you can look to see what are the referrers that are pointing to us. If there are a significant number of sites pointing to things at a certain location, you can look to see if it's impractical to have this redirection side of things, you can contact them saying, we are actually moving things. Labor intensive, yes. It's important if you're dealing with primary materials or legally important materials. The other thing you can do is just identify useful content and stuff that's used. You can say, wow, I didn't know people actually use that. So our analytics show this directory of policies on fill in the blank. A lot of people are going to that. We ought to make that usable. We ought to make that findable later on. So that's that point. Another thing is that business models might change in terms of how you provide access, whether for a while you're paying to get into materials, later you're not paying, and then later you're going to have to pay. You may have access windows and things like that. Business models don't have to break things. This is an interesting example that sort of cuts both ways. So this is a link to an article from the National Law Journal that I had found, and I was like, oh, actually, I wanted to read this. Well, you get there, and it's fairly reasonable what they're doing. They say, it's no longer here. You can actually get to this on LexisNexis and or you can subscribe. It's sort of a typical thing a lot of newspapers do. You pay to be a subscriber. You can get into it. And then they provide you with the original link is there, and then the link to where it's at is there as well. So that's the good news. The bad news, which is a little bit of minutia, is that I click on it, and it turns out that it's actually not available in Lexis Advanced. It's only available in Lexis Original and Complexity, but I'm a good researcher, and I still found it, so it still is there. So business models don't have to break things, but you need to have that forward-thinking ability to say, I'm still going to have a surrogate representation for something that used to be there to tell people there is still a way to get to that material. There is still a way to do that. The next point I'd like to suggest here is that, we as webmasters should promote and deliver canonical references. So references that are reliable, references that you can predict and rely on for a long term. One area, and this was mentioned earlier, and I know a lot of courts rely on this, and especially a lot of academics cite to this, is SSRN, Social Science Research Network. The thing that they do is they have a lot of early scholarship. So if you're publishing, you might be publishing super fast, citing to it and things like that. That may be the only place you can find it, or maybe the best place you can find it because that's where you saw it, and that's where a full text version of it is available for free, which often is what we're trying to do in forwarding the expansion of knowledge. SSRN is pretty responsible about this. So the thing that they do is they provide up at the top the abstract number, so it's ssrn.com/abstract number. They even suggest a citation. They go another step further. They put in their source code, they mark it up with meta tags for a DOI style link that says this is what the abstract URL is and this is what the citation URL for the PDF is. And then the neat thing is then, because they're doing it that way, the thing that shows up in a Google search result will be that canonical reference and not the other one that actually shows up in the address bar. So that's the good part of SSRN in terms of delivering it that way. The bad part, or rather the thing that could be improved, and this is where I'm saying deliver to people these canonical references, is that SSRN, though, when you're looking at things, what is it that is in the address bar that you link to? It's papers, it's sol/papers.cfm, blah, blah, blah. Cold Fusion, as much as I love it, it might not be here in 10 years, right? But there may be a way to redirect you to a different way to deliver that. So that's not that great. And then the next one is even worse because that's a link to the PDF. The hard thing is you can't underestimate human nature in the problem here. What's human nature? Human nature is to say, this is fantastic. I want to grab this. I want to share it with my people, and I'm going to get it out on Twitter. I'm going to do it super fast. So if you get somebody who does 120,000 tweets, what are they going to do? They're going to grab that URL. They're going to link it. They're going to send it out there, and it's going to be papers.com, SOL, blah, blah, blah. That's pretty reliable. Actually, most of these are still functioning, and they actually still work, but it's not the canonical reference, and it's not the one that's the easiest to find in terms of referencing that and making that available when you're sharing the link with somebody. That's the issue there. The other thing in terms of canonical things, and I'm not going to go into detail about these, but another approach is to use like a DOI infrastructure or a handle and things like that, where you have a unique reference that's going to say, I'm looking for X and this is how you can find it. In between referencing it and actually delivering it, there may be changes in terms of the infrastructure or the way that things are delivered, but if you make that the place that you're promoting, that people reference your materials, then people will reliably be able to find them. The thing that you need to do, though, if you're a webmaster, is both promote those, tell people this is what you should be talking about, this is what you should be doing. You should deliver them, so you should make it so that to whatever extent possible, that's what's in the location bar. It's not a bunch of server parameters that are passed through and Twitter campaign tags, and also you should encode it that way, which is the SSRN example, so that as these things are indexed, you're making it so that what is there is actually the way that you wanted it to be referenced and involved in that. A next thing that I'll say very briefly, and I don't have a lot of good suggestions or ideas about this, but link shorteners, they're evil. They're a necessary evil, but they're still kind of evil. And I actually, the best source of information that I have on this is somebody else said this back in 2009. And ironically, this is still available. So it's, until this disappears, it sort of undercuts a little bit about the true evilness of Bitly and link shorteners. But if you go to Ironic, capital I, you can take a look at that and you can see a view of, at the time in 2009, what a lot of people were saying is the biggest problems of link shorteners, and they've only gotten worse. If you use a site like Twitter, you might take your link, shorten it in Hootsuite, and then post it on Twitter, and then they're going to shorten that link with a Twitter shortener, and you've got 4, 5, 6 layers of abstraction, 4, 5, 6 times that something might break between posting and accessing later. If it's the immediacy, I'm going to click on it now, that's fine. If it's cited somewhere, like the Oxford English Dictionary often cites just things in Twitter saying that is the first place this thing existed in English, you need a way to connect those things. So that's the problem. And then if you go on and look at that, you'll see that, for instance, and this is just news from 2009, but it's still relevant. At the time, the fourth most popular shortener got hacked, redirecting a lot of people. And then trim, tr.im, they threw in the towel and they decided they're not going to do it. And they went at least until 2010, but they didn't guarantee anything beyond that. So link shorteners, evil, but necessary evil, because we're still at 140 characters on Twitter. The next thing I'd like to say is that we really need to, wait a second, this isn't it. We need to welcome our robots.txt overlords, okay? And what does that mean? What that means is we need to basically say, if we're providing things online, especially if we know that we're in a place where we're representing or providing materials from a department that might not exist later, materials that we cannot commercially support the longevity of those for eternity, allow robots to go in, harvest those, put them in an archive so that you can have them available later, so that you can use tools like Memento that we'll hear about in a little bit. You can use the Wayback Machine and things like that to say, I know that it was here. I put it out there. I tried as hard as I could financially to give it to people, but you know, I said, spiders, please go out there and do this, and it's going to get in there. And then the extension to that, again, this is if you are commercially able to do this, is to start with just making robots available or making robots eligible to crawl that content, but then affirmatively put that in a place using a service like Archive It and other tools that are going to capture things at the URL in which you expected to find them. So that's another thought there, is welcome those robots to come in, harvest your stuff, even if you don't want Google to have it, even if you have other exclusions that you say, I'm not going to make it available, allow it to be harvested and affirmatively put it into these archives. I've got 3 concluding thoughts here. Actually, there's 4. Again, when we're redesigning, we know things have to change stylistically. There's many important reasons to do this. However, you should do this responsibly. Look at the logs, decide what's important in terms of content, and advocate to people that making rules to say to go from X to Y aren't hard, and you can actually do some of those after the fact on the redirection thing. So if you have link rot problems that are systemic or large collections of materials have disappeared, you can do that. You can redirect if possible, but just redesign responsibly. And allow content capture. Allow those robots to come in, get things, put them into archives. To the extent that you can, promote and publish canonical references. And a lot of that is borne out by the journalist recommendations and suggestions in our white paper that says, best practices in terms of styling links to make them available. And then the last thing I'll say is, archive assets with the original references. So make it so that if somebody referenced, linked to, cited, quoted the URL at a certain time, make it so that that is then also later available. If your subdomain disappears because that department no longer exists, figure out a way that you can get your server to say, we know that subdomain exists, all those materials have disappeared, but still have a way to allow people to get to something that's at the root of that content so they can then look backwards and say, oh, this is what was available at the time that somebody wanted me to know that it was there. So that's the Webmaster's view, and that's all I have to say on the subject. If there's 1 minute for questions, please let me know, and otherwise send me anything on Twitter and otherwise like that. Thank you very much.